Hello everybody. So these are two quintessential French pieces here, 18th century ones, particularly fine ones, commodes, from the glory days of great antiques. And I do hope that examining them will help us better understand this subject, God forbid. Now on the right side of the ring we have our champion representing Paris from the 1790s, the time of the French Revolution, a Directorate period, therefore, commode table in mahogany and gilded brass. And of course with some beautiful trefoil clover-shaped keyholes. That's a sophisticated locking mechanism that you'll find on some of the finer pieces of the day and a little thereafter. Now in American history, the most famous pieces of this particular micro style belong to 5th President James Monroe, and he brought them back from France after serving as ambassador there in the year 1797. The secretary desk we have covered in a separate video, but it is now on display in the James Monroe Museum, and it is considered to be the piece of furniture on which he drafted the Monroe Doctrine. But anyway, he also purchased a table bouillotte and a commode. Yes, there was a James Monroe commode, also in mahogany, in this heavily brass-adorned style with a little gallery that goes around the top. However, his piece was slightly less complicated and sophisticated. What was Monroe doing with his pieces? Well, he probably purchased those pieces first to furnish the ambassador's residence in Paris, which was in what is now the 9th district. The building, the Folie de la Boussière, is now the site of a pizzeria near Moulin Rouge. And without getting into any nasty stereotypes about how people from the south of France are slick swindlers, and how I actually ironically swindled them out of this beautiful commode, I used the troublesome term antique earlier to refer to what we're discussing here today, and I endlessly repeat that pieces like this actually belong to the genre of art history called the decorative arts. They are pre-industrial period pieces, exactly that which predicates, by virtue of their quality, our interest in the first place in antiques, while paradoxically making up only a small minority of all of the antiques out there. Anyway, so this double commode video comes as a sequel to the channel's most successful video. These are all very obscure videos, but in that video we saw 3 different iconic commode tables from the French 18th century, all made in Paris, and that revealed the evolution of style across this century, from curves to straight lines. We saw a Parisian rococo commode in that video, and then we saw a transitional one, and then we saw a purely straight-sided, although softened with subtle curves, by no means was it rigid, Louis XVI period commode. And so this adds to that video by showing us what a rococo earlier 18th century commode looks like when it's made outside of Paris, what a particularly beautiful example of Provincial furniture looks like, and Provençal southern furniture. And then we kind of complete that first video by taking a look at how that neoclassical later 18th century Louis XVI style changes during the final decade of the 18th century with this revolutionary Directorate style, prior to this neoclassicism becoming incredibly amplified during the subsequent Napoleonic Empire. So just as here we have a particularly complete and compelling example of Parisian furniture from the 1790s, here we have a particularly graceful example of Provençal furniture from the 1750s. And I don't mean provincial, because that just loosely refers to any type of furniture made outside of Paris across a whole smattering of different periods and in a smattering of different styles. I mean Provençal, directly referring to the department in southern France of Provence. So we're talking about one of these southern cities of this large region which united via 3 states coming together in 1486 and then joining themselves to the court of France. But this could be Montpellier, this could be Marseille. I think that this is actually from Avignon. It could also be from the capital of the department, Aix-en-Provence, perhaps even Arles, maybe even Nîmes. Anyway, in addition to calling this Provençal, another term that the French use to describe a commode like this is Meridionale, a commode méridionale, which just means close to the Mediterranean. So the Directorate period or style is named after the governmental period, which actually only lasted a few years during the 1790s, when France was governed by a Directorate. And this was a period of incredible change. Not that people stopped lying, cheating, killing, and stealing, but there were fairly dramatic social, political, and ideological shifts. Now, this is a period where furniture tends to be relatively scarce. The country was in turmoil. The typical clientele for this type of furniture, a bunch of aristocrats, well, they were having their heads cut off or they had been exiled to other places such as Philadelphia or England. And so a lot of the newly rich during this time were content to take over homes, mansions, chateaux, which had been abandoned and seized by the nation. And they were a little bit too busy and disinterested in the details of decoration. So anyway, that's why Directorate period furniture is not the most common type of furniture you're going to encounter from the 18th century. So the Directorate style, a transitional one, emerges out of the old regime's Louis XVI aesthetic. And here we basically have a Louis XVI commode, but which has been outfitted, enhanced with this bedazzling, heavy use of brass fillets, brass inlays, brass fluting, and brass plaques. Now, one of the things that makes this piece a little more outstanding than your typical rare 18th century commode like this is the presence of ebony inlays around all of the brass moldings, which frame the main shapes of the drawers. Now, you'll also notice that unlike the James Monroe commode, the maker of this piece went to the trouble to divide this top drawer into 3 different sections. So when a style is conceived around simplicity, differentiating between tiers of quality is a matter of attention to detail. If we look at the James Monroe commode, the fillets of brass that frame the shapes of the drawers, those are quarter cylinders. So a dowel cut in 4 ways, and then that quarter cylinder has a piece of brass applied over it, and then those tiny little strips are nailed with tiny nails at the edge of the drawers. Even at a glance, if this might appear to be the same kind of piece, we get closer, we notice the ebony inlay, we notice the tiny fillets of brass that I already mentioned, but then we're also going to see that the brass moldings here are not simple quarter cylinder shapes, but it's a more complicated curved shape. Anyway, just pointing out how that would have actually been much harder to make than the quarter cylinder ones that you see on these pieces most of the time. And look, if you come around, you're going to see that they have the quarter cylinder moldings over here. And that's really typical of the 18th century, where there is a difference in the workmanship or the attention given to the front of the piece versus the side. Anyway, I kind of need to clean this piece up a little bit. I'm going to a lot of trouble not to show it in the wrong light, because it's just not quite in a state where you'd really want to scrutinize it. Now, of course, if you're a furniture person and you appreciate it as something that's, 230 years old and you take it from afar, it's incredibly impressive. But when you get up close, I see that this could use a little bit of TLC. I sold this piece many years ago, actually, and I have it back because the lady who bought it has come down with a very severe case of Alzheimer's, and her power of attorney returned it to me and just suggested that I eventually find a new home for it, which I was happy to do because at the time I didn't think to film it. Not only is the texture fairly nice on these brass plaques, but on the James Monroe commode and on many other pieces of this variety, you won't have a casted plaque here. This is actually quite heavy. You'll just have a sheet of brass which was stamped and then applied in the same way with 4 nails. But if we were to take this off, we'd see that it's a few millimeters thick. Well, naturally, I keep comparing this commode to the James Monroe commode because that's probably the most famous commode of this variety that exists. But we will see ones from this time of this style in the French Ministry of Culture's National Furniture Reserve. But again, that one is quite a bit simpler than this, and perhaps with a replaced marble. But in general, one of my requirements for taking up people's time with a piece is that the piece must live up to those pieces which have already been edified by the French government and which are stored permanently by that branch of the French Ministry of Culture. Now, in case you were wondering, the conical tapered feet coiffed with little rings and ending in gilded brass sabots, the gilding of which you really cannot see because I have not dissolved all of that crappy old varnish, vernis au tampon. It's a French polish. Let's not say just an old varnish. It's a Very nice finish, but it's turned yellow and it's obscuring the gold. I haven't stripped it off of there, but I assure you it's gold. It would look great. I'm working on it. Anyway, that exact type of foot is something that we're going to see on furniture from antiquity. I keep saying this is neoclassical. It's truly, at the time, a new interpretation, a new resurgence of ancient furniture design. So let's see if I can't find some ancient Roman piece of furniture with these types of feet, and you'll see what I mean. Anyway, they're typical of Directorate furniture. Now, there's also a 1790 painting in the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art of a lovely late Louis XVI, early Directorate period table bouillotte, reminiscent, similar to what James Monroe brought back. Some people would say that that's a painting of the Comtesse de Lagneron, who died at 22, and later, because she was a noble, her body was disinterred and desecrated by a bunch of revolutionaries. Pretty classy. But I say that that is a painting of a table because I look straight at the furniture when presented with any image. Enough talk of these countesses. Let's go back in time to about 1750 to the south of France with this commode, which represents a totally different variety of furniture. This is fine veneered Parisian. This is non-Parisian solid wood, showcasing the triumph not of the veneer artist, but of the sculptor. And of the great diversity of regional pieces out there, work from Provence, specifically, is distinguished by being brilliantly imaginative, mastery of these wonderful curves, great dexterity to the sculpture and the design, but also it's distinguished by being comprised of quite a few original models or types of pieces, such as the bread cage, the pennetière, or, if we want to speak in terms of larger case pieces, the buffet à glissant, sort of a buffet with these little sliding doors on the top section. And we're going to see commodes like this in various different French museums down in the south, although I've yet to find a comparable that's really just like this, which would allow me to say exactly where it's from. Some of the sculpture reminds me of the sculpted flowers we saw on a masterpiece armoire, definitely from the city of Nîmes, by the master of Nîmes, Pierre Piot, although I am not sure that this commode is Nîmoise. Nîmes, the city down there, is also where the fabric denim gets its name, de Nîmes, from Nîmes. It was a fabric, very durable, dyed blue with the indigo that grows in the region. My favorite part of this piece is the coordination of the keyhole entry plates, the key escutcheons, their harmony with the surrounding rococo sculpture, which may seem to form some type of a heart, but in any case, it's a typical rocaille, a typical rococo motif. The French actually have a noun to describe that. They call it a rococo. Another region that is responsible for commodes and solid walnut would be that of around the city of Lyon. Although with a little bit of focus, we can quickly determine that this is not a Lyonnaise commode. Now, I am particularly happy with the color of the sides of the piece. Some beautiful grain there to the wood. And I like the bottom traverse. That's something that I am particularly drawn to, this sort of sequential flow from one keyhole to another, all the way down there to that beautiful sort of feathery, flowery plume, evoking the tumultuous unpredictability of nature, as well as its beauty. I like the sculpted foliage on the feet, believe it or not, and I enjoy how much movement there is in the sculpture that is attempting to form a static frame outlining the shape of the drawer. Obviously, on a neoclassical piece, it's far more rigid. So anyway, you can see with the Rococo style that it is nature-inspired as opposed to inspired by classical architecture. There seems to be some of its design that is left to chance. And you wonder if the piece itself hasn't stopped growing, if it's not going to move as you look at it. Now, of course, the side there is buckling up with time, and as charming as that is, it is a bit of a bummer that the previous owners seem to have left a few rings on the top, but I suppose I would have rings myself if I had made it 270 years. There are a few woodworm holes, but nothing to be afraid of, pretty typical for a piece of this age. And we can look along the back and see not only that this piece took the train, speak of the devil, there is a train ticket sticker, something back here that says Nîmes. So perhaps this is not from Avignon, perhaps it's from Nîmes, or an inordinately wealthy person that would have owned this in the south had a home in Nîmes, and that's not at all directly related to where the piece was made. These places are like all 50 miles apart, so figuring out where exactly a piece was made. Anyway, this could be from Nîmes. What does that say? Gare de départ, departure station 93. Huh. Okay, well, I could have investigated the piece a little bit more, and maybe that would have given us a clue. But this is all a discovery process, making these videos. But anyway, along the back, we can see that this was clearly cut out by hand. You can see these irregular, fairly obvious saw marks that you're not going to see most of the time on later copies. Now, a piece like this is so fine that it might have been copied by an incredibly competent furniture maker. However, the wood wouldn't show certain signs of age, and I showed photos to friends who were Paris appeals court experts, and anyway, no one's bugging me as to the 18th century authenticity of the piece, but the back is reassuringly oxidized and dark. The woodworm holes are different in size and color, indicating different attacks from different insects at different points in time. I have treated the piece and killed them all with a chemical, although I would have preferred to kill a few of them by hand. It's a dream of mine. And if we open these drawers, we're going to be able to compare the dovetail techniques from the 1750s in the south of France, and then we'll see how, instead of there being two large and well done but comparatively rudimentary dovetails here, sometimes they're secured by a single hand-forged nail, but here I don't see any nails. Two large dovetails in 1750 in the south of France, and we move over here and we end up with four. And then as we get into the 19th century, there'll be 75 dovetails on a single drawer. I'm, of course, exaggerating, but as time progresses, the techniques get finer and finer and finer, and they reach sort of an apex of exquisite perfection right on the cusp of Industrial Revolution, the 1830s, and that's when the true art of furniture begins to devolve into the commercial paradigm of sort of household goods that has continued today. Back then, these were works of art, and the people who commissioned these works of art really understood that, and I'm sure their checkbook did too. We'd have to do a bit of a study on the time value of money, but items like this were prohibitively expensive. Now, another thing that's quite amazing, if you want to talk about the quality of the past, is just the solidity of the locks that you're going to see in here. The two top drawers have retained their original locks. It's a lock this big, it's the size of your face. They just used like 3 pounds of metal to make what today would be done with some little latch that barely works. And then the bottom drawer has apparently lost its original lock. That looks 19th century. Also, for the record, these period 18th century brass open-worked galleries are considered to be brazed together about every 20 centimeters. That's why you can see where this one is coming apart. If you look very closely here, you'll actually see a seam where it was joined. Apparently, in the pre-industrial world, the metal had to be produced in shorter segments, and then later on the few copies of this micro style that might emerge, you end up seeing galleries which are totally contiguous, or which are only joined together in 1 or 2 places. And here there's 7 or 8 different joints where this has been brazed together. So the sun is on its way down and the frogs are beginning to ribbit. So I would like to ask that you please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the endeavor of creating this online reference where people can have access to this previously esoteric information detained only by curators and people in old families. It really would have been helpful for me as I tried to learn about furniture from the past to have access to some sort of digital centralized hub where I could see hundreds of benchmark examples of things against which I would judge anything that I came across and tried to buy or maybe shrewdly avoid. So, also, please know that my customers are a central part of why I have been able to film over 100 relatively museum quality items now, and I'm sure some of you are watching, and I'd like to thank you personally for what you've done to allow this great adventure of my life to be possible. So again, thank you all, and I'll see you at the next video.